The gates of Melos are open, not broken open, not stormed. Open because the men inside finally understood something that every city on the Aegean had learned the hard way. When the Athenians offer terms, you are already defeated. You are standing on the harbor wall in the first gray light of 416 BCE, and below you, the women of the island are being pulled out of doorways. An old woman drags a carved chest behind her. Useless. A chest of dowry linens for a wedding that will never happen. A soldier takes it from her. Another soldier takes her. The men of military age are being led up the hill to the high ground where the city used to hold its assemblies. They will not be coming back down. And every single thing you have ever believed about war, about mercy, about winners and losers is about to be rewritten by what happens next. Here is the difference between your world and theirs. You have grown up inside a system that handles defeat. Geneva Conventions, prisoner of war registries, Red Cross parcels, repatriation flights. It is imperfect, it leaks, it fails, but it exists. Your ancestors had none of it. In ancient Greece, losing a war did not mean going home and licking your wounds. It meant your city stopped existing. It meant your name, your family line, your god statues, your grandmother's loom, all of it was transferred to the winning side like furniture after a bankruptcy. The Greeks did not have a word for defeated nation. They had a word for what you became. So what did the ancient Greeks actually do to the losers of war? And why is the answer so much darker and so much more strangely honest than anything your school textbooks ever printed? Stay with me. Because under the marble columns and the philosophy courses, the true history of Greek warfare is a history of what people do to other people when absolutely nothing stands between them and total power. The first thing they did was decide whether the loser got to surrender, and on what terms. Greek surrender had two flavors, and the difference was everything. If a city surrendered under a negotiated treaty, the fighting men marched out under truce, and the civilians usually kept their lives and their homes, only now under new management. That was the polite version. But if a city surrendered at discretion, unconditionally, into the hands of the victor, the laws of war simply ended. The defenders were not prisoners. They were plunder. Thucydides, the Athenian general turned historian who wrote the definitive account of the Peloponnesian War, records the arithmetic of this in cold blood. At Melos in 416 BCE, after the famous Melian dialogue, that hushed conversation in which the Athenians told the islanders that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, the end came fast. Book 5, Chapter 116. The Athenians put to death all the men of military age. They sold the women and children into slavery. And the island, which had been inhabited continuously for centuries, was emptied in a single season. That is not an anecdote. That is the template. Melos was not a scandal in its own time. It was paperwork. And that is the first hard truth about Greek war. The annihilation of a city was not an atrocity that slipped through the cracks. It was a category. The Greeks called it andropodismos. The literal translation is ugly, man-footing. The sale of a whole population into slavery, head by head, body by body, the second thing they did then was industrialize it. By the 4th century BCE, enslaving an entire defeated city had become a standard feature of great power ambition, the way a modern superpower might annex a territory or demand reparations. When Philip of Macedon captured the Greek city of Olynthus in 348 BCE, he razed it and sold the survivors. The orator Demosthenes, who watched Greek allies go under one by one, made the fate of Olynthus the centerpiece of his speeches back home, and in Diodorus of Sicily's later account you can read the melancholy logistics of a city reduced to a slave auction. But the scale hit its horrifying ceiling in one afternoon in 335 BCE, when Philip's son, a 20-year-old king named Alexander, stood outside the smoking ruins of Thebes. Thebes had been the city that once led all Greece, the city that expelled Spartan occupiers, the city of Epaminondas, the greatest general of his generation. Alexander sold everyone who had not died in the sack. The number recorded by the ancient historians, in Diodorus Book 17, is around 30,000 people. 30,000 free Greeks, men, women, children, grandmothers, newborns, marched off in columns to be auctioned in the slave markets of the eastern Mediterranean. Thebes was so thoroughly erased that the ground where it stood was auctioned off as farmland. That is what winning meant in the generation of Alexander. But here is the twist nobody puts in the movies. The Greeks had a rule. and almost nobody followed it. The third thing the Greeks did was negotiate. Because prisoners of war were the single largest engine of slavery in the ancient world, the slave trade around it became a business with its own prices, its own markets, and its own logic. When the Spartan king Cleomenes captured a force of Argives at the Battle of Sepsia shortly before 490 BCE, he did not kill them on the spot. Herodotus tells us he set a ransom. 2 minae per prisoner, that is roughly the price of a good mule, or about 2 months' wages for a skilled workman. A man's entire freedom, his name, his return to his children, priced like livestock at a fair. And here is the darker part of that same story, the part Herodotus records almost without comment. Cleomenes accepted the deposit, and then, after the Argives had paid, he had the ones he'd freed put to death anyway. The point is that the system was not cruel by accident. It was cruel by pricing. You could buy your way out of being a loser if you had the silver, if you had a family that could scrape it together. If the market did not decide your life was worth less than the cost of the rope, the scale of this machinery is staggering. The island of Delos, the sacred heart of the Cyclades, spent centuries as the Mediterranean's most notorious slave market. The geographer Strabo preserves a boast from another writer that Delos could receive and dispatch 10,000 slaves in a single day. 10,000 a day. And modern scholarship has confirmed the ugly logic. In his major 2018 Oxford study of Greek slavery, the historian David Lewis argued what ancient moralists suspected. The single most common way a free Greek became a slave was not birth, not debt, not criminal conviction. It was war. Your enemy losing a battle did not just mean your enemy was embarrassed. It meant your household gained a new maid, a new tutor, a new field hand with a Greek accent. The fourth thing the Greeks did was take the women, and this is the part the marble statues never show you. War's horror in the Greek imagination was written most vividly onto the female body. In the Iliad, written down around the 8th century BCE, Homer puts the prophecy of defeat into the mouth of Andromache, the wife of Hector, the greatest warrior of Troy. She knows what is coming. She says in Book 22 that after Hector dies, she will be dragged away by some bronze-armored Achaean, her day of freedom gone, and she will live another's life for the price of her husband's. That is not poetry. That is policy. When a Greek city fell, its women became the sexual property, the concubines, the household servants of the victors, and their children, if they survived at all, were bred into the slave population of a foreign place. The Athenian assembly debated this fate explicitly in 427 BCE, after the city of Mytilene revolted from the Athenian Empire. Thucydides in Book 3 records the debate. The demagogue Cleon argued for the full andropodismos, the execution of all adult males, and the enslavement of every woman and child. The philosopher Diodotus argued against it, not out of mercy, but out of self-interest, asking, in effect, why would you destroy a city that pays you tribute? The assembly voted for death. Then, the same night, it voted again and reversed itself, and they launched a trireme with the reprieve, racing dawn across the Aegean, 1,000 men rowing like their souls depended on it, because, for a few hundred prisoners in Mytilene, their souls literally did. The fifth thing, and the thing that will stick in you long after this video ends, is what happened to the survivors who went home. Because the Greeks punished defeat not just on the battlefield, but in the family, in the street, in the mirror. In Sparta, the most extreme military society the West has ever built, there was a word for a warrior who survived a lost battle: tremantes, the tremblers. Xenophon, the soldier historian who wrote the Constitution of the Spartans, describes their fate in Section 9. A trembler was stripped of every civic right. No one would eat with him. No one would talk to him. He was forced to wear patched clothing, a badge of shame, to yield his seat to everyone, even his juniors, to be beaten, to be passed over, to live out his life as a breathing corpse. The Spartans engineered their entire society so that a man would rather die in the mud with his shield than come home and face the silence of his own wife. And there is no negotiating with that. You cannot ransom a reputation. You cannot buy back a name that your own city erased. So what did the ancient Greeks do to the losers of war? Everything. They killed them. They sold them. They ransomed them and then killed them anyway. They raped them and shoved them into kitchens on the far side of the Mediterranean. They erased their cities and auctioned their earth. But here is the most honest, most terrible part of all. They also wrote it all down. Thucydides recorded the Melian execution in the same history that made him famous. Demosthenes screamed the fate of Olynthus from the rostrum of Athens. Homer put the prophecy of the enslaved queen into the most famous war poem ever written. The Greeks were not secretly humane people who had a few bad episodes. They were a people who looked at total power and decided to keep a record of what they did with it, so that no one could ever claim they didn't know. And that is the difference between you and them. Not that you are kinder, not that your civilization is more evolved. You have the same fear, the same tribe, the same hunger, you just have better insurance. The loser in your world gets a trial, a treaty, a refugee camp, an op-ed. The loser in theirs got a number written in chalk on a slave merchant's board, next to the price of a mule. Hold that thought. Next week, we are going to follow the captives, down the gangplank, onto the auction block at Delos, into the houses of the men who bought their bodies. The price of a human being in ancient Greece. You will not believe what it was. Subscribe, and you'll be there. Drop a comment. Which Greek defeat stayed with you? Melos? Thebes? The trembling men of Sparta? The strangest answers always end up in the next script. Hit subscribe. We are just getting started.